I was gonna ask if anybody guessed what the yarn was. It's
Oh,
actually,
sorry.
yeah, we did have a wool session planned tonight, but I just had also promised that we would do a round robin before we started. So with that done, I don't know if anybody
And
noticed that, but yes.
I just wanted to add one other thing I forgot to say, that I was finished with the third clue before we had our break. And it seemed like every so often I would just pick up my work and look at it and think, oh, how pretty. I can hardly wait to get the next clue.
Nice. I know it's these yarns are so appealing in a really like organic way that just they really do catch your eye when you know when you just glance across the fabric. And I really, every time I'm in the shop and I see our last year's pieces are here, and they always catch my eye. So I love these yarns, and having a whole bunch of different yarns in one project is sort of my happy place. So for anyone who didn't notice that note in the email, this week's yarn it's actually a blend. It's our East Frisian milk sheep wool, which is a fan favorite. It's every time we have this wool in stock, it sells out immediately. And this is a blend, and it's a different blend than the milkshake yarn, which we actually recently did East Frisian wool in Barn Box. We did a blend that we call Milkshake, which is all sold out. It was an alpaca East Frisian blend. And we'll be, I think we're going to get a small run of that for fall back in stock. But this is also a blend of East Frisian, but a different one. So we're just trying different things with it just to see how people like it. And I thought it would be fun to do a similar blend, but with a different component, just to see how people like it. And if they feel like did anybody recognize it by working with it, or, anybody guess or no?
Nope.
So again, this is a 3-ply blend, and it's 90% East Frisian this time with 10% Corriedale. And the Corriedale, of course, is the gray. East Frisian is only available to us in white because of the nature of the breed. And to get colors with it, we blend it with other things. So in Barn Box, we blended it with alpaca for kind of a warm, toasty brown. And this time we blended it with Corriedale for a nice, actually a darker gray than I really imagined it would be, with only 10% color. So you can see how strong an influence a gray can have on a white, with this blend being just 10% gray and 90% white. It actually really came out darker than I thought it would. But for those who aren't familiar with the East Frisian milk sheep, it is it's a breed that originates from the region of Friesland, which extends along the North Sea coast, encompassing parts of Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And as well, and it includes kind of a fringe of offshore islands that belong to Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. So it's kind of in that bordering on the Northern European areas. Sorry, I'm getting stupid text. Anyway, so we know how far back this breed at least was established, when it actually had an established presence because these milk sheep appear in paintings from the 15th to the 17th century. So we know then that by the 1400s, these sheep were kept fairly commonly throughout that area. They're dotting the landscapes and confirming their presence on farms during the Flemish period. Prints from the early 19th century depict short-tailed Frisian sheep, which suggest a link with the Northern European short-tail breeds, such as the Finn sheep and Romanovs, and that they would be consistent with the Frisians' highly prolific reputation. So this is a breed that was established probably during the 1300s when it was first being bred, and then quickly became an established breed because it is so prolific, which I'll talk about a little more in a second. They are a marsh or heathland type breed, which includes, the Frisians are a family of sheep, including the East Frisian milk sheep, which are from East Friesland, Germany, and the Netherlands, the Dutch Frisian milk sheep from West Friesland, and the Zeeland milk sheep from the Zeeland island to the south. The German East Frisian milk sheep is the most common and the best known and most important of the Frisian breeds, and recognized in when people refer to the East Frisian, that's the branch of the family that they're talking about. So they're found in many parts of Germany, and they are, by and large, the kind of sheep that are held by small households and small holding farms, because they're easy to keep in small numbers with a family around. They're really friendly and easy to deal with. They're good with children around, and they have very kind of pet-like personalities. So they're an excellent sheep for a small family milk flock. East Friesians are considered to be the world's highest producing dairy sheep, averaging 300 to 600 liters of rich milk per lactation period, which is 200 to 300 days, often exceeding 1,000 pounds when milk suckled by lambs is included. So the 300 to 600 liters is in addition to any milk they produce for their offspring. Let's see. Their milk production is compared to that of a Holstein cow. And in fact, Friesland, the geographical area, is the kind of place of origin for both the East Friesian sheep and the Holstein cow. There's also, I believe, there might even be a Friesland cow, but I'm not sure if that's kind of another name for the Holstein or not. So being a milking sheep, they are highly domesticated. They are used to being kept close to the home, and in a barn, having to come back to the barn a couple times a day to milk. So they're not a super hardy breed like the Shetlands or the Gotlands, where you can kind of let them loose in the to wander the hinterlands. They're not that kind of sheep. They are they breed and thrive better in conditions that are more specialized, that are warm with consistent food of a high nutritional value. They are usually white in coloration, although there are dark ones. The white ones are kind of overwhelmingly preferred, I guess, in the early breeding stages. And they tend to be relatively docile and adapt well to intensive parlor milking systems, which is a desirable trait in dairy livestock. An East Frisian has a very fluffy fleece. And so when they're in full fleece, they have that kind of adorable round, the adorable cartoon sheep look of a round sheep with stick-like legs and kind of like a comical big ball of wool with the little legs sticking out. The different Frisian breeds are similar in appearance. They have pink noses and their heads are clear of wool, which is called having an open head, clear of locks, and naturally polled, so they're hornless. Their legs are short-haired with pale hooves, and their most distinctive physical feature is kind of a rat-like tail. They're not a short tail sheep, they're a longer tail sheep. So they have a thin, long tail free of wool, and which often extends to the ankles. The ewes tend to lamb by the time they're only a year old, and mature ewes are even more productive, averaging 2.25 offspring per litter, which is another valuable trait for, especially for smallholders and especially for dairy farms. East Frisians produce an abundant white wool, which is 35 to 37 microns, so in the higher medium range, with a staple length of 4.5 to 6.5 inches, and fleece ranging from 8.8 to 11 pounds per season. Their medium length fleece has a clean yield of about 65% with a texture and fineness that is acceptable for use in clothing and household goods. It's not so rough that it's relegated to rug making and upholstery, but it's not so fine that you would want to knit underwear with it. That said, just like any other sheep, the first clip, the lamb's wool, is going to be finer and softer. And so for a small household, this multi-purpose sheep will also produce somewhat of a multi-purpose fleece over its lifetime. So if you always have lambs in your flock, you'll always have lamb's wool available, and as well as the sturdier, more mature wool at your disposal. And with dairy breeding, you're not breeding lambs to go to market. You're not sending lambs to market at 3 months. You're allowing many of them, at least the females, to mature so that they can produce milk. So you're gonna have your sheep through through 2 or 3 years of wool cycles, so that you'll have the opportunity to harvest different types of wool from the same animal. So to produce a substantial milk yield, the ewes require a good quality diet. So they usually are fed high protein feed and grazed on very lush lowland green grass. I'm sorry, I lost my words for a second. The ewes often produce triplets or even quads. So when they do that, it puts their body under a great deal of stress. And so especially during lambing season. And so the lambs themselves can be prone to pneumonia and other illnesses, and may need some, like I said, they're not the most hardy constitution type of animal. So oftentimes some of the lambs may need nursing or indoor conditions through their very early ages. In the 1990s, the East Frisian was introduced to the United States through Canada as purebreds and kind of caught on in local dairy operations. while the breed is not one that does especially well in large flocks or challenging weather and range conditions, but due to their extraordinary milk production and lambing abilities, the ewes are kind of ideal for crossbreeding with more hardy breeds. And so here in the United States, there has been some experimentation with breeding, breeding these sheep with other, creating crossbreeds that produce a high amount of milk and a high number of lambs, but have a little bit hardier constitution so they can be kept in larger flocks. Frisian crosses have rapidly become the breed of choice for commercial milk producers here in the States. It's nothing new when dealing with this breed, though. In the Middle East and the Mediterranean regions of the globe, crossbreeding Frisians has been one of the strategies that they use for some of the same reasons, because the weather conditions can be fairly harsh in those regions. So they have been crossbred with some of the African and Middle Eastern breeds to produce the Israeli Asaf sheep, which has lamb and milk production double that of its pre-generator, the Awasi sheep. East Frisians are also crossed with the Lacaune breed and have been a success in the Wisconsin climate. And I'm thinking that might be Lacaune, might be some kind of French breed, maybe from Canada, that is raised in Wisconsin and crossed with Frisians. As you know, Wisconsin is a big dairy state, or if you don't know, it is. They produce a lot of milk and cheese there. And so Wisconsin farmers have a big stake in improving the output of their sheep, as well as the breeding of stronger strains of the sheep that produce good milk. So in America, one of the breeds that farmers are crossing with Frisians is the Dorset sheep, which Dorset is another wool that we did in Barn Box this year. So we have a Barn Box chat all about Dorsets as well, but that enabled them to produce a Frisian sheep with a slightly larger frame and larger carcass. The larger frame is important, not so much because this sheep is, known for its meat, or because dairy farmers want to produce a sheep that has a larger meat carcass, but carrying those extra babies, having more room to carry the extra lambs, gives the lambs a little bit better chance of good health when they're born, and a little bit just a little bit better send off in life, and a little bit more blood and muscle and fat to support the lambs as they're gestating. During the 1990s, 11 pregnant ewes and 4 rams were imported into New Zealand from Sweden, and a breeding program was created in New Zealand using embryo transfer techniques in quarantine conditions, meaning they're trying to produce a purebred Frisian sheep in New Zealand. And by 1996, the first rams were released from quarantine and allowed to leave the farm. The rest of the sheep remain in quarantine to expand the flock numbers. Semen sales from that flock have been very high, and in 1995, the first flock of pure East Frisians from the Silver Stream Ranch was registered. So now they're also being raised down under in New Zealand. In terms of, we haven't talked an awful lot in the mystery wool along, or even in barn box. We don't get the opportunity to talk a lot about dairy sheep, but dairy sheep and goats have been milked for thousands of years, probably even before cows or any other animal. The dairy sheep industry is highly developed in many countries, especially in and around the Mediterranean Sea. In the United States, sheep dairying is a much smaller part of the milk industry, but it's mostly concentrated in the upper Midwest and New England states, and on farms that produce kind of specialty cheeses. And I'm sure now in the Pacific Northwest, this is also, becoming much more entrenched as the years go by. It's getting to be like super foodie out that way. And so I think sheep and goat dairying is catching on, in places like that as well. Also, they have a great climate in the Pacific Northwest for raising dairy animals, dairy sheep and goats, because they have such great rainfall and lush grasses and valleys to graze these animals in. Let's see. That said, there are sheep dairies in nearly every state of the union with potential for expansion, and the demand for sheep cheeses in the United States it is rising. So expanding the sheep industry, the sheep dairy industry, would cut down on the amount of sheep cheese that would need to be imported. Theoretically, any breed of sheep can be milked, but it's less profitable to milk a traditional meat sheep or wool breeds. So it's not commonly done unless the sheep can produce an extraordinary amount of milk like the East Friesians can. East Friesian, LeCoun sheep and Awasi sheep, along with the crosses of those breeds, are the most common dairy sheep in the USA. The British milk sheep currently raised in Canada may eventually be added to this kind of range of good producing milk sheep in the US. Sheep milk is superior milk. It's superior to milk from goats and cows for cheese making because it's richer. It has a fat content of 6 to 7%, as opposed to, I think, cow's milk is 3 to 4%, or maybe even closer to 3%. So it has a higher amount of fat, solids, and protein. So for that reason, sheep milk is a much higher cheese yield than milk from cows or goats. And while it is rarely served as a table beverage, it's commonly used to make yogurts and ice cream. It's also non-allergenic for people who have issues with cow's milk. Switching to sheep milk and goat milk is one strategy that people can use, but sheep milk doesn't have that really strong flavor that goat milk has. So it's for some people it's just easier to take. I know personally I really love sheep cheeses a lot. So next time you're at the store, you can look for something like Manchego, or I'm trying to think of some others, like a Pecorino that's made with sheep milk that you can try yourself. Usually they're kind of strong, the cheeses, but they, just like with any cheese, they have different varying strengths within families of cheese. So I'm sure it's possible to find one that you like. And though the fresh milk is preferable for making cheese, it's the best. Sheep milk can be frozen for up to a year without losing its cheese making qualities. So that is another factor that allows producers and cheesemakers to manage their milk supply for maximum production and profit. They can wait until they have enough of these 40-pound frozen bags of milk to ship to a processor, even one that's like some distance away. These blocks of frozen milk can be added to until it's enough to like fill a pallet or a car and have it shipped by train even. It's also, it can also contribute to better profits because you're able to save the milk out of season. So as you know, from buying any kind of dairy or milk or egg products, even when the season is right, those products get really inexpensive. And then in the wintertime, when hens aren't laying as much or when cows aren't producing as much milk, those prices can go up. So they can vary throughout the year. And milk producers can take advantage of the kind of swings in the market to save some of their milk for a time when they can get a little more profit from it. In a dairy operation, the sheep are usually a triple purpose animal. So the management decisions focus on maximizing milk production while at the same time managing the meat and lamb sales and the wool sale and the wool production as kind of subcategories. Especially if meat prices are going up or if breeding stock are bringing premium prices. And actually that's a fourth product that any flock will produce is producing rams to sell off for breeding at other farms. Wool receipts are usually negligible, so that's kind of the last thing that is on the list of a dairy farmer in terms of keeping up the quality, but they can usually at least cover the cost of shearing sheep. So keeping the ewes clean and healthy for the best birthing experience. And some farms are beginning to focus a little bit more on wool as well. And so if they're able to breed for higher quality fleece and keep their sheep healthy through lambing, they can create crosses with Romneys and Corriedales to kind of create a better wool quality that will expand the kind of profitability of their Frisian flock. It's funny because apparently, I don't know, apparently we're like one of the only businesses to ever want Frisian for making yarn. We were first introduced to it by one of our mills a number of years ago, probably like 3 or 4 years ago. And I didn't know what it was, but when I felt the fiber, I thought it was really lovely. And that farm that we got it from at the time was owned by an elderly couple who were basically getting out of, they had sold off their dairy business, and they were only keeping the sheep that they had left as they died off. They weren't adding to their flock. It was just basically a family kind of collection of sheep. And so when we wanted more of that fleece, it was unavailable. And since then, for the last 4 years, we've been, asking everyone we knew about getting more Frisian, because when we spun that first yarn, it sold out in like 3 days. It was a real favorite of our customer base. So it took a while to track down Frisian. And then when we found it, everyone was just surprised that we wanted it. I think one of the reasons it's not available isn't because there aren't very many Frisian sheep. It's because when they shear these sheep, they just don't even consider bringing it to a mill or telling a mill that they have wool, just gets thrown out or whatever. So now we have a mill that's in touch with a couple of producers who will, when they shear their sheep, they will send it to the mill for us. So it's kind of funny. The mill still can't, the mill that gets it for us is still just shocked and surprised that of our customers' appetite for this fiber. But so far, every time we've produced it, it's been a real favorite. And it's the wool quality is just appealing for some reason. I can't really say why. I know I like it because it's very springy and airy, and it is a soft medium fiber. It's just very appealing. And one of the reasons I like it is that because it's very springy, the yarn knits on a really wide range of needle sizes. So you can make different fabrics with the same yarn. You can knit a really light, lofty fabric for a sweater that has practically no weight, but is nice and warm. Or you can knit it really, really tight and make, mittens or booties or something like that that will wear like iron, because it's also very strong fiber. So those are the reasons I like it. But I know when our barn box, it wasn't barn box, it was actually, we did it in a club. When the first yarn went out in our club and then again in barn box this year, the appeal was immediate, like out of the bag. People just loved it. So it has some kind of, I don't know, lovable quality to it that makes people want to touch it and knit with it. So we'll be bringing in more of it, but right now this is our newest kind of iteration of our Frisian wool for the obsessive Frisian lovers in our following. And like I said, this time we blended the Frisian with Corriedale, which we haven't really covered Corriedale in a while. So I took out my notes from an early club about Corriedale wool that we did. Corriedale is, excuse me, I need to grab my water bottle here and get a swig. Sorry. So Corriedale is one of the very early modern breeds. It's an inbred half breed with merino on the female side and English Lincoln Longwool on the male side. And it was developed to be a dual purpose sheep, which combine the best traits of wool breeds and meat breeds. So early in New Zealand's history, income from sheep was primarily derived from the sale of wool. Just like really around the world, countries that produced a lot of wool, like Great Britain and, to some extent, the United States and many parts of Europe, when the Industrial Revolution got underway and mechanical means to spin and weave and knit yarn became available, the appetite and consumption of wool rose dramatically in a short amount of time during the mid 1800s. With more and more people moving from rural environments into the cities to work in factories, those people didn't make their clothes the way that they used to. So they were consuming ready-made clothes. And, you know, at one point, the wool industry could hardly keep up with the demand from the textile industry for wool. And of course, this was a time that predates the introduction of synthetic fabrics or the widespread production of cotton. So wool was the mainstay of really all fabrics, all textiles used in the clothing and household goods industry. So only after the cotton gin was invented, that was, you know, later in the 18th century, and a widespread cotton industry was developed, what was that kind of stronghold on the wool industry, on the textile industry, kind of disturbed a little bit. And then textile makers began experimenting with blending cotton and wool together and making fabrics, ready-made fabrics from cotton. And so there was a little less stress on the wool industry. But for a while there was a huge demand for wool worldwide, and hardly the sheep industry, the wool industry could hardly keep up with it. So sheep production spread down into Australia and New Zealand, and many people emigrated there from England with the purpose of developing large tracts of land for grazing sheep and producing wool. And then, of course, several things happened. Like I said, the textile industry began to catch up a little bit, and other types of fibers became available to the textile industry. And so the stress on the wool industry not only eased up, but began to decline. And also the invention of refrigerated shipping created a mass market for meats to be produced. So in addition to the wool, it began to be profitable for people who raise sheep to produce sheep with larger carcasses and larger meat production. So there began to be a shifting priority on sheep herders to produce more and more meat. And again, people moving into the city didn't have their own farms anymore. And so they were purchasing not only textiles and ready-made clothing, but also more food that was prepared for the table rather than growing their own or raising their own. So in New Zealand and Australia, these large tracts of land were ideal for raising sheep, but even those areas became stressed agriculturally by the demand of larger and larger numbers of sheep being raised there. And so there began to be experimentation with crossing different breeds to produce sheep that had a nice fleece and a larger carcass and could thrive on conditions that were drier and less nutritious, and in a large sheep running operation. So a more large format operation, as opposed to, you know, what we just talked about with the East Frisian, which thrive better in smaller flocks that live closer to home. So one sheep rancher, James Little, went to New Zealand in 1863 from Scotland. He is given credit for establishing the Corriedale breed. His experience with raising sheep in Great Britain, in Scotland, led him to bring some Romney sheep to New Zealand in the 1860s and to a couple of large ranches, established ranches there that he was managing. So he didn't own them, but he was managing them. And one of them was called Corriedale. And he crossed the Romneys that he brought from Great Britain. He crossed onto Merino ewes to begin evolving a sheep of a kind of dual purpose type. But he wasn't getting consistent results with that. So, and if you remember, his name came up when this is not for everyone here, but for those who were around when we studied Polworth wool in the barn box, his name came up with this crossbreeding of Romneys on Merinos, and the failure of that kind of to produce the consistent wool quality that he was looking for. But then he experimented with crossing Lincoln and Merino and came up with the right mix of genetics to produce both a beautiful fleece and a nice healthy carcass, a nice size. And if you remember, we kind of grazed over this a little bit, but Lincoln sheep are a really large British breed. They're one of the long wool breeds. They are one of the largest sheep, and their genetics are both assertive and strong. And their genetics are really good for crossbreeding, in different circumstances. So their genetics assert themselves in any crossbreed and have a positive effect, kind of overriding some of the genetics of the other breed that you're crossing with. So it's kind of interesting that they're like a crossbreeder's prayer from heaven, or answer to their prayers. The Lincoln will appear in a lot of different crosses, and they are all different from each other. They don't have like the same characteristics ultimately, but the genetics, the basic genetics of the Lincoln breed are healthy and strong and useful in a variety of circumstances. So anyway, he was able to produce a stable genetic set of characteristics with the Lincoln Merino cross, and he named the sheep Corriedale because that's the estate that he was working on at the time. The resulting sheep, the Corriedale, produces a heavy, valuable fleece and a high quality carcass, yielding an excellent commercial outcome, commercial return. Corriedales are docile, easy to care for animals, and excellent mothers. They have a high fertility rate that exceeds 100%, but not quite as they're not quite as fertile as like the Finn sheep or the Frisians or the Jacobs. But anything over 100%, 150% is still a really good yield in terms of fertility rate. Their wool is bright, dense, bulky, and soft handling. It's a medium coarse wool. It ranges from soft cream to a really dark brown black. And the diameter ranges from 25 to 30 microns. So it's on the low end of the medium range, in the softer side of the medium range. And that's in adult sheep, and lambs and hoggets are in the low 20s. So that's in the merino range. And we've talked before about how there is true merino fiber that comes from merino sheep. And then there is merino type fiber. When you're working with a mill and you're making yarn blends, you can have access to merino type fiber, which is merino that's not produced necessarily by a pure merino sheep, but still has the fiber quality that falls in the merino range, which is 19 to 24 microns. So Corriedales often do fall within that range, especially the young first clip lambs and hoggets. The name Corriedale was chosen to be the official breed name in 1902 when the New Zealand Sheep Breeders Association began publishing the Corriedale pedigrees. The first flock book was published by the Corriedale Sheep Society of New Zealand in 1924. And so Corriedale is a really springy, it's got a high grease content. So when we have made Corriedale yarn, it's pretty lossy in terms of your raw fiber. You pretty much have to have twice as much raw fiber to produce X number of pounds of yarn. But that yarn will have a lovely lanolin content that you can actually feel. It has a high moisture content, and the lanolin is really apparent in the wool, and that lanolin that stays with the wool tends to protect it and keep it very supple and strong, keeps it from fraying and pilling really easily. Our confection yarns are spun with 100% Corriedale wool that's raised in central New York State on a farm that they run about between 300 and 350 head of sheep, and they're all different shades. They have lots and lots of dark Corriedales, but they have, pale gray ones and white ones. And I've actually visited that farm and taken some video that you can find on our YouTube channel if you ever want to just look at some sheep. It's the Bear Farm, BEAR, and they have a wonderful, they're very hands-on with their flock, and it's a fairly large flock for a family of like 3 people to manage, but they really do a nice job. It's beautiful wool. And so that's in our confection yarn. Now I have to admit, the Corriedale that's used in our Frisian Corriedale blend, our yarn C here, I'm not sure if that comes from that farm or not, but I can probably find out, but I'm thinking maybe it does not come from that farm. Probably another one, but Corriedale is a pretty common fiber. I know there are lots of farms here in Ohio that also raise Corriedale. I've been able to pick that up, for spinning, and in the past with, you can buy it really inexpensively, already processed and everything for spinning in really nice range of colors. So little shout out to Corriedale there, even though it's only 10% of our yarn. It's kind of an unsung hero of fibers, and we don't get to talk about it that much, but this was a really good opportunity to introduce it. So that's my wool school session for this evening. Any questions before we close out? Anybody? Anyway, it's a really pretty silver gray, kind of actually more like a pewter gray color this week, and it kind of pops. The other yarns in the hap shawl are more tend toward warm grays, and so this one really pops as a true blue gray, and I really like that it's the only one that's kind of that cool blue gray. Julie.
Did this Frisian come from the same place as the last Frisian, the peanut butter milkshake?
Yes.
It's
yes.
the same Frisian.
Same farm. Yep. I think we're gonna probably end up sourcing from a couple of different places, but this one did come from that same farm. So we're just really lucky to have access to our one mill is really involved in cultivating all the different sheep breeds. You know, they're really involved in supporting and encouraging the wool industry around them. They really get out there and create opportunities for the producers to incentivize them to focus on wool a little bit more with their flocks, to cover their sheep and breed for better fleeces, and putting them in touch with programs like ours, which consume fiber that's off the beaten track and not necessarily thought of as yarn wool, but we can make it work. So that's a real plus for them if they've been focusing solely on meat production or solely on or mostly on dairy, and now have an outlet for wool. It's just a little bit of additional income and incentive to consider that as they grow their flocks and grow their farming, their commercial farming. So we're always happy to be part of that circle as much as we can. Any other questions? All right, well, I'll be seeing you again on Saturday. And don't forget, this week we're taking submissions for naming the shawl. So one of the parts of the mystery knit along is that we pick the shawl name based on contributions from you guys. So if you have a clever idea for naming the shawl, you know, short and clever is best. Like some long name with 6 words probably won't make the cut because it's just too long, but something cute and clever and short and sweet and funny. I think you have a form you can go to submit, and then next week we'll narrow it all down and you can vote. And then the week after we'll reveal the winner of that, and the winner gets a prize. So I think there might even be like a runner-up prize as well. So anyway, good night for now. I can't believe it's 8 o'clock already. That went by so fast, and I'll see you Saturday.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
You too. Thank you.